Hello, my name is Jeff Costlow. I'm the Deputy CISO at ExtraHop Networks, and today we're going to talk about how to talk to the board about cybersecurity. A lot of things have changed recently, and we've made a lot of changes, and I suspect that many CISOs will go in front of the board and communicate and talk about the various changes that they've made and the changes in the security landscape and how they've made sure to secure their organization. So what we're going to talk about today is a few things. First of all, we're going to talk about the mandates of the CISO, security, compliance, and business level alignment. We're going to bring those together, make sure that we understand those, and then we can talk about the challenges that we have. And we do indeed have challenges. We're going to talk about lawless innovation, or sometimes called shadow IT, talk about misalignment, how we misalign our goals just for the sake, sometimes for the sake of security. And then there's a predominance of reactivity out there. And we're going to talk about how that reactivity can negatively affect you in different ways that's a problem. And then we're going to talk about strategies. And this is where most of the presentation is, but we're going to talk about putting risk in perspective, leading with resilience, knowing the gaps that are in your program, business risk and reward, and then finally responding to yes. We'll talk about all those things in the course of the next half hour. And I do want to say that this is kind of my journey. I started off as a software engineer, wrote a lot of software associated with security. It's very technical. So there are some things that came naturally to me, understanding technical risks, but then some things that didn't come naturally. For example, the business alignment and some of those sorts of things didn't come naturally. So I've had a chance to learn, and I'm hoping I can share some of that with you today. So first of all, let's talk about the mandates that we as CISOs have: security, compliance, and business alignment. Security is the first one. Security is what we have to do. Just to define security, security is making sure that we've secured the assets of the organization from misuse or leaking or whatever. Most of the time, the CISOs are the ones who are responsible for that. We're also responsible for business objectives and making sure to meet the goals of the business objectives. The second factor, that's security. The second factor is compliance, right? Whereas I like to think of security as inward facing, security is the day-to-day hard blocking and tackling that needs to be done for what we do every day. Compliance is more of an outward view. So compliance is, we're familiar with SOC 2 or FedRAMP or HIPAA or PCI. Or maybe the NIST cybersecurity framework or the ISO framework, or there's a lot of ways to break this down. But compliance more or less says, hey, all those internal details that we're spending all this time on, we are doing those correctly, and we're doing what we said we were going to do, and we're monitoring our logs, and we know what our firewall is. We're paying attention to all these things. So again, I like to think of security as inward facing, the processes and procedures that we're doing. I like to think of compliance as the outward facing portion of it that says, this is what we're doing. We are doing the correct thing. Finally, there's business alignment. And business alignment to me is one of the harder things. I could build the most secure system, and I could have all my compliance against it, but if it's not aligned with what the business wants to accomplish, then I haven't done my job correctly. So I want to be able to convey that to the board and say, these are the things we're doing from security. This is the compliance regimen that I'm applying to it to make sure that we are doing it correctly. And then I'd also like to say, I went and I spoke with internal business unit 1, internal business unit 2, and I spoke to them, and we all worked together to come up with a secure workflow that integrates all those environments. So that's great. Those are what we have to do. We have challenges in front of us. What are those challenges? And let's not get to solutioning too early yet. Let's think about the challenges, and then we'll go into some strategies that I've learned in my time. So the first challenge is lawless innovation. It's more common to call this shadow IT. All you have to do is Google or search the search engine of your choice, search shadow IT horror stories, and you will find a ton of these. There is the laptop that runs underneath someone's desk that it turns out it's a business critical piece of software that everyone's using, and it's just running on a laptop under a desk somewhere. There's also plenty of stories. These are some of my favorites, the ones about somebody just wanted to get their job done, and so they started forwarding all their business email to their Google account or their Yahoo account or something like that. Or maybe a personal Dropbox use. One of my favorites is unapproved chat clients, and even worse is operationalizing those chat rooms. This is sometimes called chat ops, where inside a chat room, you set up robots and you make sure that things are happening, and you can automate processes through a chat robot. Those sorts of things are great because they get the job done, right? This is lawless innovation. They are doing what they need to get their job done and making everything work better. However, they haven't taken the secure approach to it. And that's where my objections fall into it, right? Talk to me. Let's talk about this. You want to run chat ops? That's great. What tools do we have in order to enable you to use that? How can I make sure that the data that's going across that is not just somewhere out there, that it's well secured? And what I've found is that in my professional life and my personal life, the greatest changes or the greatest challenges come at the times of the greatest stress. And I think that makes sense, but it certainly doesn't make the changes any less stressful. So I want to think about this from a perspective of the most recent challenges that we've had, the kind of the COVID challenges. So this is a paper that ExtraHop did. We looked at some devices. We can kind of tell some generic devices that customers have in their environment. We can tell what those devices are. So we started looking at this in November 2019, or we compared from November 2019 to March 2020. In between there is when an awful lot of people started to work from home. So this graph here makes a lot of sense. You can see that laptops decreased in use, smartphones decreased on networks. And that makes a lot of sense, right? A lot of people took their laptop home, they took their smartphones home. Some other things, smartwatches and tablets, and I can't explain the treadmill one. There's a treadmill there that decreased 100%, which means we had one treadmill and we lost it. Somebody took the treadmill home, I guess. This makes a lot of sense. People took their devices home. The interesting thing is the uptick in IP cameras. So obviously people were setting up IP cameras to watch over the unused area of the office to make sure that physical security happened. That seems to make sense to me. The other interesting things to point out about this are printers pretty much stayed exactly the same with a small rise. And that's sort of what I would expect, that people had printers and they installed printers. So there's still a lot of printers out there on the networks that may not be being used. There may be some risk there. That's kind of a separate conversation. The other interesting one is network storage and network switch. Network storage had some growth and network switches had some growth. I sort of attribute that to just the general growth of those devices. That momentum kept going. I don't know what the normal growth of that is, but that probably actually slowed down a little bit. So this is kind of interesting. You can go to extrahop.com and type in device activity COVID-19, and you'll find this white paper. I think this is pretty interesting. But the point is that our security landscape has changed, and that brings about misalignments, right? We had secured something, and then the landscape changed out from underneath us. And another example of that is just kind of the bad guys have adapted to this already. We knew as soon as COVID-19 started that people were attempting phishing attacks with COVID in the name. And there were more malicious domains registered with, so the bad guys adapted very quickly. I hope security teams adapted quickly as well. Our next challenge is a very general challenge of reactivity or possibly overreactivity. And of course, the headline here is that a computer virus jumps to humans. That's not true, of course. That never happened. But a lot of times when there is a big high-profile news story or a high-profile breach, people want to go out and figure out what happened and make sure it doesn't happen to them. And I think that's natural. But when you talk to the board, what you want to do is you want to communicate, hey, I know about all these challenges. I know about these particular things, and the latest and greatest that you just read about in the news, that can't happen to us because, and tick off your fingers, we don't employ that. We've put a firewall around it. We have endpoint protection. We've done these particular things. We're watching over our network, and we understand where these things can happen. This is risk management 101, right? This is understanding what our real risks are, and then being able to communicate to that board, to communicate that to the board is very important. So let's talk a little bit about strategies and the things that I've developed that help me to have communications, upward communications. And the first one is risk and perspective, right? This is what I just alluded to last time. The risk of something going wrong is what I do in my day-to-day job. I need to understand what the risks are. I need to mitigate as many of those risks as I can. And it doesn't help with a constant onslaught of this breach happened, this breach happened, and this breach happened, because those may or may not affect me. If I find a new attack vector, I should be closing off that attack vector and understanding what that vector is and approaching it from a risk-based perspective and showing the board that I understand what my risks are, instead of reacting to the latest one. It's a much better use of everyone's time and resources to focus on the things that I can plan for and the things that actually affect me, rather than chasing down the things that can't affect me, or the things that are just such low risk that it doesn't matter. So let's keep talking about this a little bit. You know, ensure this doesn't happen to us, avoiding reactivity. And here's an interesting aspect of this. The average cost of paying a ransomware actually goes up if you pay that ransom, because you still have to do all the work to recover. So think about this from the board's perspective, right? What I want to do in the case of a breach is I want to be prepared. I want to go back to my backups. I want to go back and I want to pull the information from a cloud store backup or something like that. That's a much better message than we'll just pay the ransom and we'll still have to pay all this. So the second kind of strategy of putting that risk in perspective is to think about the common threats, right? So in this, we can see that there's a lot of common attacks, external attacks, lost or stolen assets. These things all happen. This was a Forrester research. However, in a lot of cases, internal incidents turn out to be either malicious or just a plain misuse or an accident of how it was configured, or just an accident. So it seems to me like spending a lot of my time making sure that automation is in place and that I'm not making silly mistakes. I'm not accidentally leaving S3 buckets open. I'm not making mistakes of that order. I hate self-goals or self-owns. I just really dislike those. And so getting to the point where I can convince the board and myself as well that we have done the proper things to make sure that these common sources of misuse, that will keep us out of the news, and it will go a long way towards convincing the board that we're doing the right thing. The next one is lead with resilience. And what I've put up here is I've put up kind of a quadrant system of managing and protecting, identifying and detecting threats, respond and recover, and then governance and assurance. And we talked a little bit about compliance. These are kind of the wheel of everything that we have to do. So I'm going to build something of a straw man here, but if you think about this, managing and protecting, if I put all of my effort into managing and protecting all my assets and identifying and detecting threats, just those two, that's a good portion of it. But I didn't have any respond and recover, I wouldn't have a good, resilient program when something went wrong. And communicating to the board that I have worked on all these, managing and protect, I've got my endpoint protection, I've got my firewall, I've got my VPN, I've got all those things. Identify and detect. I've got my SIM, I've got my network detection and response, and I'm watching over the network, and we're watching to make sure that all these things happen and the detections are happening. Oh, and by the way, respond and recover. We have tabletop exercises. We know what's going on. We have trained, we have playbooks, we have all these things prearranged and ready to go. That goes a long way. Oh, and then finally governance and assurance. And to prove to you that we've done all this, we've got our SOC 2 or we've got our HIPAA, we've got all these things taken care of. That goes a long way towards helping the board to understand that you've taken the proper steps to secure your environment. Here's an example of that. Gartner has said that we've shifted a lot of dollars from the protection and prevention over to detection and response. And I've noticed in my career a lot of pendulum swings, where this pendulum swings from I spent all my money doing protection and prevention and moving that into detection and response. I don't think this one is a real pendulum swing. I think this is sort of a correction, and people are understanding that they need a resilient defense and they need ways to bring all these things together and build it and build a comprehensive program. So this resilience really goes a long way. So, and I want to bring it back to kind of the recent incidents that we've had. Working from home, Facebook is the latest major tech company to let people work from home forever. This is a change in the landscape. Things changed. The shops that did really well responded very well to this. They worked out and they built up their VPNs, or they did what they needed to do to grant access to everybody and have everything there. I think that's a good story. I think that resilience is a good story. And here's where I want to convey a story that I have. In February of 2020, I was in San Francisco for the RSA convention, and there was a CISO summit. And I went there, and a board member of a very large corporation who had a very large, high-profile breach stood up in front of everybody, and he said, you know, it was like walking past a burning building and having somebody standing out front saying, it's okay, I got this. And that really made me think a lot, because I can picture myself in someday, hopefully this never happens, but someday standing in front of that burning building and saying, it's okay, I got this. And that's when I resolved that I wouldn't be saying, it's okay, I got this. I would be saying, it's okay, I got this. There's a fire truck from fire department number 1 coming down the road, and he'll be here in 5 minutes. And if there's a traffic jam, I've got fire department number 2 over here, and they're prepared and they can be here in 7 minutes. And if that fails as well, I've got a helicopter on retainer with a big bucket of water underneath it, and it can be here in 10 minutes. That's the sort of resiliency that I really want to build into my security program. The next general strategy that I've discovered is knowing your own gaps. So there are a lot of foundational control sets and things like that out there, frameworks that help you understand and help you build this up. And as a longtime engineer, I think about complex problems, and I think about breaking those complex problems down into smaller pieces and understanding what those smaller pieces do, and then implementing those and building a larger structure out of this. So the CIS controls are controls that help you understand, control the aspects of your network, aspects of your environment. The MITRE ATT&CK framework describes how attackers operate. And then the NIST cybersecurity framework, and these are just examples, bring all that together into one big comprehensive thing. So I want to do kind of a thought exercise here, and I want to think about this. So you are medieval edition, right? CIS controls medieval edition. Your king has just built a new castle somewhere, and you're in charge of defending it. So what's the first thing you do? Well, you go out and you build a wall and watchtowers and gatehouse defenses, right? So that's sort of the equivalent of a firewall. We're going to put this thing around us, and we're going to make sure that everything's happening. I'm also going to build up troops and make sure they've got the swords or the tools that they need in order to watch all this and make sure everything happens. And as time goes by, we find that we've gotten pretty good at that defense of the wall sort of thing. But now we're going to move on, and we want to make sure that we've got archery and projectiles. And not only that, but we're looking around the outside. We're spending patrols out into the nearby area to make sure that attackers don't come to us. And if they do, we know about it so we can get prepared for it. We'll spend a little bit of time monitoring the moat and making sure that the drawbridge is operational and making sure that everybody who comes into the castle is accounted for, those sorts of things, right? You can see how this is building up and you can see how this applies to yours. And as we move further on and we get more mature in our capabilities, we're going to start making sure that we've got smithy operations to make sure that those swords and arrows and all those things that we need, the day-to-day things, are still there. We're going to start holding drills and melees and generally prepare and make sure that everybody knows what their job is in case of an emergency. And then we're going to start stockpiling food and supplies and storage and making sure that we are more resilient to attack. So I kind of lose this analogy towards the end, but I think you all get a pretty good sense of how you can set these all up and build these things. So knowing the gaps, this is the MITRE ATT&CK framework, the CIS controls, and then the NIST framework. They all do different things, and putting together a comprehensive security program that builds everything in together, it's important to use these frameworks to describe what you're doing. And the board will understand when you walk in there and you say, the NIST cybersecurity framework or the MITRE ATT&CK framework, we've got all these controls in place and we're stopping all these attacks from these perspectives. One of the last strategies here is focusing on business objectives. So this is what the board fundamentally cares about. And again, we've had a lot of challenges recently around some of the COVID and work from home and things like that. And this guy just needs to get his work done. And he's got a lot of distractions, but he's also got the tools, and we need to give him the tools that he needs to get that work done. So this is another interesting aspect. We took a look at how people were accessing resources from home and from remote. And the answer is pretty much what you expect: VPN tunneling or HTTPS proxies, or just straight up HTTPS, some amount of RDP. And we also know that people are accessing sensitive information, right? They're accessing a whole bunch of information. They're doing it from home. So what we have to do is we have to make sure that we're giving those people secure access and making sure that they can work from not from a coffee shop, but work from home, make sure they've got all the tools they need to get their job done, or we'll get shadow IT, just like we talked about earlier. The final strategy here is a roadmap to yes. And this isn't so much a board level thing, but it's an internal sort of thing. And so the way I like to think about this is I really do like to think about, I've tried to build a roadmap to yes. I don't want to be I've heard this recently, the Pope of Nope. I don't want to be that guy. I want to be the guy who says, you have a business objective. I understand your business objective, and I want to help you get there. When can we get this done? Not if. When can we get this done? What are the things we need to put in place? Well, we need a comprehensive audit strategy to make sure that we know who's accessing the resources and when they're accessing them. And then we can put together a comprehensive roadmap to what it is that we want to build. So first of all, in order to do that, you have to demonstrate the understanding of the business requirements. And then show them how security will help achieve those business requirements, and then reframe the discussion around when, not if. And I think this goes over well at the board level, because when you go in and you say to the board, you know, I went to Mabel in accounting, and Joe in sales ops, and Louise in IT, and we all sat down together and we laid out the workflows and we made sure that the workflow was secure and all the way through, that will be a successful conversation at the board level. So I want to wrap up here and talk a little bit about the checklist and the things that we've talked about. Put the risk in perspective. Understand what your risks are, understand what your controls are, and be able to communicate that effectively to the board. Lead with resilience. So the board understands that things might happen that are less than optimal, but if you're able to recover from those in a resilient fashion, that says a lot about the program that you've built. Know the gaps and how to close them. So there are gaps in the system, and your job is to figure out where those gaps are and close those gaps. That's a resilient approach. Focus on the business risk and reward. The board understands the business can move ahead, and the business should move ahead in a secure fashion. And finally, build a roadmap to yes with all your teams. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for listening to me talk today. please visit the ExtraHop booth, the virtual booth, and they can help you understand what ExtraHop can do in your program. Thank you.